New project for the day. Taking water out of the nose of the pump. I'm just telling the camera what's going on. I might make a video out of this.
You won't
If
up
I
there
feel
and
like
look. Step up here on this thing.
2011 F150 with
What do you think about it?
89,000 miles on it. Already has a bad water pump. We'll see how it goes. Okay guys, I'm gonna sort of just talk through this video a little bit. Fast forwarded through some of the disassembly. I started working on this before I had done any research on YouTube about what the common failures on this F150 tend to be. It's a 2011 F150 with about 97,000 miles on it. And the failure ends up being the coolant tube, or the coolant tee. So what I'm doing here, I'm just removing the intake hoses and tube, and then I'll move the throttle body after that. I should have paid more attention to where it was leaking. My dad had mentioned that he thought it was the water pump. It looked like the water pump. It was sitting there spinning, slinging off the pulley. It was coming out of that tee, dripping on the pulley, and the pulley was slinging it around. So at first glance, I just took his word for it. He had fired it up. It looked like it was coming out of the snout of the pulley, possibly. So in hindsight, it was the coolant tee, which is pretty aggravating. But you'll have that every once in a while. So, and I fought with this a little bit. I was pretty new to some of these Ford proprietary connectors that are on some of these hoses and these coolant tees that tend to leak. It's a Ford proprietary design that they came up with, kind of like their fancy 3-valve spark plugs and some of their other genius ideas that turned into big flops. One thing I will say is I can definitely see why it leaks. You've got the engine sitting there moving. That coolant tee is attached to the thermostat housing, which is attached to the water pump. So it's rigidly attached to the engine. The engine shakes around. The radiator hose that's connected to that tee is shaking differently or isn't shaking much. The radiator mount's on isolation mount. The radiator's it's got its own isolation mount, so it can move around a little bit, but it's not going to be moving the same as the engine with the torque of the engine and things. I could definitely see why it works on those O-rings over time and loosens and wears them, and it starts to leak. This was my first video wearing the GoPro on my head. I like it. It's not too bad. I should have done a little better on the lighting. I didn't do the greatest on some of the lighting. And then also had my daughter running around and my dad. He was sort of watching her while I was working. But I'll say one thing. It's hard to work and not get distracted by your kids. I love them. Man, they can be distracting. They can completely get you crossed up. Here I was popping the belt, the main belt. I didn't even look real quick to realize there was two different belts at first. I still needed to get that main belt out of the way, I think, to get one of the water pump pulleys. We went ahead and replaced the pump. We had pulled it off before we realized it was probably the tee. Because after I pulled it off, I got online to see if any of the part stores had one in stock, and it just dawned on me to search, hey, what are the common reasons these things leak? Because I've had a bunch of modular engines over the years. Those modular pumps, I've hardly ever seen one leak. I mean, they seem to be a really robust design on most of the previous modulars. I didn't figure this one would be much different, so I was curious why this pump was leaking. And when we got it off, the pulley and the shaft, we'd already had the pulley off, but the shaft and everything felt really firm and solid. Didn't have any slop in the bearings. I didn't see any reason why it would be leaking. But we had it off. It had 100,000 miles on it. We needed to go. We found out it was probably the T leaking. So we went ahead and went up to the auto parts stores once we got it off, and excuse me, I was yawning late at night. But we ended up going up to the auto parts stores looking for this coolant T or some O-rings. And then we decided to go ahead and put a new pump in it. It's got 100,000 miles. Dad makes some pretty long trips with the truck, so figured while we had it off, why not put a new one on there? A little bit of extra expense, but and yeah, my shop and toolbox is still a mess. I've been busy with work projects. This was kind of a sort of an emergency deal. It's Dad's only truck. It was leaking. It leaked a gallon of antifreeze or more just on his way across town. He filled it up before he left his house. About a 15-minute drive, 20-minute drive across town. It leaked almost all that out on the way over. So he needed a truck to drive. Well, I let him borrow my car actually that day and kept the truck here at the shop, but and I didn't repair it till the next day. But I need to work on my dump truck and some other stuff, and I don't have a pickup truck right now as a spare, so kind of short on vehicles for spares right now. So I haven't been doing a lot of work in the shop. I threw this one in there just because I needed to get hit. He could have taken it to his shop, but would have hated to see what they would have charged. He mentioned possibly taking it to the Ford dealer. I know they would have been real high. Probably would have been a $500-600 repair. Although they probably know it's coolant O-rings, so they probably still would have been $100-120 for some O-rings. I think we bought the kit for $19 for new O-rings, and now we're about 120 in it, and we've got a new pump and new O-rings. So in the end, when you do things yourself, you definitely get more bang for your buck. And it's just the way it is. I mean, service costs, mechanic costs, they're just really getting high. The dealership charges a lot. They don't pay the mechanics a whole lot, but the dealership charges like they pay them a fortune. And most of the dealer rates, I think, are anywhere from $75 to $100 an hour for dealer rate. The mechanics probably get in the high teens, maybe $20 an hour. One of my good buddies, he works for, he's the one we're flipping this house with. He used to be a mechanic, used to be a service writer. So he had moved up from mechanic into service writing in the dealerships, and so I know about what they make, at least in the area I'm at around Central Illinois. They don't make a ton, so nowhere near the rate you're getting charged. So if you can find a good shade tree or mechanic that does work on the side at his house, usually the rates there are much better and the quality of work is similar. Half the time these dealers struggle with real complex problems just as much as a shade tree mechanic would. Got the belt off, pulling the thermostat. I fought with that, or maybe I still fight with the upper radiator hose. Those clamps, they're just kind of aggravating. So I got that upper hose off and the coolant tee out of the way. I'm popping the bolts on the water pump. Again, this job took me longer than it should have. And then I cut out the part where I was basically had to pry the water pump out. It was a real pain in the butt. That O-ring really holds those things in there good, which I knew that from other modulars. So good set of pry bars, real big screwdrivers. you're gonna have to pry that thing out of the block if you do have a water pump problem, need to replace it. Like I said, these things never hardly leak in the 5.4 or the 4.6s, but I wouldn't expect them to on these 5 liters either. But if by chance you do have one, they're a little aggravating to get out. That's the one thing. Having the GoPro up on your forehead, my line of sight's a little better in the GoPro, looking at the throttle body a lot there, but sorry for that. But I do like that. Do like this camera view. I might use it more often. Not on mechanicking work probably, but just in general. And even without some of these bolts, they took them back up in there so far. It's hard to even see and feel where the bolts for this pump are. Not a big fan of that big offshoot for the thermostat housing. That thing, that's kind of goofy. But whatever floats their boat. I assume those quick couplers and things are just to speed the assembly process, make it instead of having to put a hose and a clamp on, they just click these hoses together, so it saves them a couple bucks out on the assembly line, but costs people aggravation and time after 100,000 miles probably. And it did. I cut some of the commentary out of this video too. I was getting fairly aggravated once I realized that it was a set of O-rings probably and a coolant tee and not a water pump, which that was when I was putting it back together and I cut that part out. It's putting it back together is the reverse of how I took it apart, and it didn't show up as good on the video. So that was the other thing. I had coolant leaking out of that. So I had the thermostat off, but there was still coolant leaking out, dripping out of that thing, and it was getting on my hands and on my tools and or on my gloves and my tools. It was just making everything slick and aggravating to work with. And now we've got all the bolts out. We're just trying to get that pump out. That thing really just doesn't want to come out without being pried out. I was double checking to make sure we had all the bolts out. Trying to use a big screwdriver. I ended up using pry bars that I had that worked a lot better. And I would probably be careful prying on that extension off the pump where the thermostat connects to. You could probably break that thing if you pried on it too hard and we're planning to reuse that pump for whatever reason. I was planning on replacing it, so I didn't really care. I think that'll about wrap it up, so I'll probably quit narrating from here. All right, got it out of there. Took some aggravation, but just the O-rings are aggravating on them. I'll have to go find a new water pump. All right, guys, truck's gone. All fixed. It was not the water pump, as I think I said before. Probably another rant I will show you. It was the crossover tee, or that coolant tee. You need this O-ring kit. 926168 Dorman. That will fix your problems. $19, I believe, from Advance Auto. So that's all it takes to get that coolant leak fixed. And there's other videos on YouTube. I should have looked on YouTube before I even embarked on that whole deal, but oh well. Now Dad's got a new water pump, so it should be good for hopefully another 100,000 miles for sure. I'm sure the other one would have lasted a long time too, but one less thing to worry about when he's making long trips. So hope you guys enjoy the video.